Goeiedag! Good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And I have to give you the good news. The refusal by the Australian government to allow Nikki and her family into Australia is starting to gain a lot of traction. Another news report is attached here about this very story. There are now petitions in place. The government has now been put under a lot of pressure. I'm in touch with members of parliament, as are other subscribers who follow my channel. There's a huge amount of pressure being put on the Australian government to reverse their decision against that family, to allow them to get humanitarian visas into Australia. And we're actually, as a result of this, pushing for it to be a lot wider and to have special visas for Australian farmers. So there's a lot happening. Here comes the video. Please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates and have a great day. Bye for now.
The plight of South African farmers. Of course, Andrew Hastie, the member for Canning, has been pushing this as well. And it's the incredible pressure that the surviving South African farmers are placed under. Of course, we know many have been murdered, and the prospect of some of them coming to Australia under our humanitarian visa program. Jane, you interviewed today a woman put through unspeakable violence and torture in South Africa, yet has been knocked back in her request to come to Australia.
I cannot fathom what is going on here. Andrew Burrell wrote about Nikki in The Australian. Nikki had her application for a humanitarian visa or for a visa to come to Australia knocked back. My view is that Nikki and her husband, who now live separately because the family simply cannot go back to the farmhouse where unspeakable horrors unfolded, so he lives away from the family and she lives in the city, and she's sort of cobbled together her own business. I think some bureaucrats looked at that and gone, oh, they've said that they're not genuine refugees because they're trying to get on with their lives. But they are so traumatised. They had 4 hours at the hands of an absolutely evil man. I think we've got some of the audio, have we, Chris, that we can play?
Yeah, Nikki spoke to you at length about the way she was raped in front of her children. It is just unspeakable. But here's some of that interview between Nikki and Jane Marwick on Radio 6PR this afternoon.
I think the level of torture that people don't understand is, at one stage during the night, I asked him if he could please loosen the wire around my children's hands, because I promised him they wouldn't do anything, and they lost circulation. Their little hands were turning blue. There was no blood flow, and it was extremely painful. And he actually sort of, I thought he was going to loosen it, and he actually tightened the wire.
Yeah, there we go. Jane, on your website, on 6PR website, presumably people can get more of that interview. But they caught the perpetrator in this case. The good news is that he's been sentenced to life in prison. So that immediate danger is gone. But, of course, the threat against white South African farmers is extreme.
That's right, and I think this is a part of Nikki's problem, because people said, well, the perpetrator of the crimes has been caught and you've moved. Well, Nikki went on to tell, he was given 2 life sentences and 173 years, by the way, and I won't go into it because it's still family viewing time, but some of the things that happened to her, she was shot and she was raped in front of her children, suffice to say, and that's putting it nicely. But Nikki then caught up with other women. She met 12 other women. Can you believe this? Just recently, 10 of whom were widows. And I said to her, what happened to their husbands? And she said they were murdered. They were farmers. They were murdered. Some of them murdered in front of their children. This problem is escalating. Just because Nikki's perpetrator is now behind bars does not mean that Nikki or any of the others feel any safer. And David Coleman, the minister, Chris, this petition is going now on change.org. The latest figures are 6,550 people have signed it. It's spiking today. David Coleman, the minister, has to look. He has to revisit Nikki's case, and they have to look at these cases. I know Peter Dutton was pushing it earlier, but come on, Australian government, take another look at these people for the love of God.
I appreciate the work you're doing and that point of view, and I think what you're highlighting here is a horrendous situation that white South African farmers are facing. But I disagree on the politics here and the humanitarian program, and I want to get your thoughts on this, John, because I know you've got strong views. And that is, it's a dastardly path to go down to try and play off one group of refugees against another. And the fact is that there are in excess of 20 million people across the planet now who are absolutely legitimate refugees, and Australia can't take all of them. And the idea that we have to take the white South African farmers instead of others coming from Syria or Pakistan is just wrong. You can't just take a cohort, even though we took a cohort, of course, from Syria. But you've got to weigh them all up. And I'm hoping that most of these South African farmers, obviously a lot of them have have capital, have assets, can probably come here under a business migration program.
Well, you cannot get money out of South Africa. So
Right.
that is a big problem. So when a South African or formerly Zimbabwean migrants would come here, they would pretty much come penniless. Now, look, let's say your figure's correct, that there's 20 million people out there who meet the Australian guidelines of being refugees.
That'd be very conservative.
I'm sure it is. OK. And we only take in about 20,000. OK. Now, since there's like a large number of groups to choose from and a small number of positions, surely a factor is the compatibility of those people into Australia. Are they going to make Australia better? Now, I saw in your newspaper about 10 years ago, I'll never forget it, had a long list of all the migrants that have come into Australia and what percentage of them after 2 years are on welfare. South African migrants were about 2% of them were on welfare. The group that came second was Hong Kong. OK? Now, so, I mean, what does that tell you? Well,
But this is what worries me, precisely what worries me about this argument. It's good refugee versus bad refugee. Now, you make those judgments across your broader immigration program, and yeah, certainly South Africans will be able to contribute very strongly there. But when it comes to our humanitarian program, it should be decided on need. And there are refugees who fear for their lives in Sudan, in Somalia, in all sorts of countries, not just South Africa. Peter?
Well, I think that's true. I think that you're right, that there are many more people who need help than we can possibly help. What I find disturbing about this particular story is that there are undertones of an inverted racism.
Absolutely.
And that is causing great concern. I think that there is a feeling that because these farmers are white, there's essentially not the same sort of danger confronting them as confronting people from, say, the Middle East or the Indian subcontinent.
And the bottom line is it's a massive problem for South Africa and for the South African government, who should be doing more to protect these farmers, not only for the farmers, but of course for the good of South Africa into the future. This is precisely how Zimbabwe became a basket case.
Well, so it's South African farmers at the moment. But look, I'm a bear on South Africa. I was there 12 years ago. And look, you know, did you know in 1960 the population of South Africa and Australia was pretty much the same? The population of Australia is now about 25 million. The population of South Africa is almost 60 million. OK, now, why has the numbers exploded? It's because other Africans have walked across the border and come to South Africa because they wanted jobs and so forth. OK, now, I think it's South African farmers today. I think in a generation it's going to be... There's going to be difficulties in the suburbs, and it's going to keep getting worse.
Well, indeed, which is why I think it's a problem for South Africa. We've got to be tackled there rather than everybody taking flight. Not that I would disagree with anybody in that situation looking to take flight.